In the summer of 1942, the Aleutian Islands stretched like a jagged spine into the gray North Pacific, a desolate chain of rock, ice, and fog. For most Americans, they were little more than an obscure blip on a map, but for the military planners in Washington and the men of the U.S. Army and Navy, the Aleutians had become an urgent concern. In June, reports confirmed the worst-case scenario. Japanese forces had seized the islands of Attu and Kiska, establishing a foothold less than 1,000 miles from Alaska. The news sent shockwaves through the military establishment, raising fears that the Japanese might use the islands as staging grounds to strike the Alaskan mainland or even the continental United States. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Aleutians were unforgiving, a natural fortress of jagged peaks, treacherous tides, and near-constant fog. The Japanese, aware of the difficulties, had fortified positions with artillery, machine guns, and observation posts. Yet their numbers were limited, and the isolation of Kiska and Attu made resupply perilous. American commanders understood that a direct confrontation would be a logistical nightmare. The islands were a crucible where weather, terrain, and disease could inflict as many casualties as the enemy. In Washington, military planners convened to weigh options. The Joint Chiefs of Staff debated whether a small commando-style strike could disrupt the Japanese, or if a full-scale amphibious invasion was necessary. Intelligence was scant. Reconnaissance flights struggled to penetrate the dense Aleutian fog, and intercepted Japanese communications were incomplete. But one fact was clear: the Japanese presence could not be ignored. The loss of the Aleutians would embolden Japan, undermine Alaska's defense, and provide a psychological blow to American morale. By late 1942, the decision was made. The U.S. Army's 7th Infantry Division, alongside Canadian forces, would launch a coordinated assault. The operation, later codenamed Operation Cottage, would require careful planning. 35,000 troops, supported by naval bombardments, air cover from the 13 Fighter Command, and intricate amphibious logistics. Landing craft, artillery, and supply ships were readied. Each vessel was inspected, each map scrutinized. Commanders held endless briefings, rehearsing landings and contingencies against entrenched Japanese positions. The men assigned to the operation were a mix of hardened soldiers and young recruits, many unaccustomed to the Arctic climate. They trained on the rocky beaches of Adak and Attu, drilling through wind-driven rain and icy surf. Officers warned repeatedly that the Aleutians could be as deadly as any Japanese soldier. Hypothermia, frostbite, sudden storms, and treacherous cliffs claimed lives as surely as bullets. Morale fluctuated between nervous excitement and grim determination. Letters home described the eerie beauty of the islands and the anxiety of stepping into the unknown. Meanwhile, the Japanese garrison on Kiska remained largely unaware of the scale of the American response. Their withdrawal from Attu after the Battle of Attu in May had been brutal, leaving the Americans to learn the cost of Aleutian warfare firsthand. On Kiska, Japanese troops fortified positions, anticipating an assault that might never come, or so they hoped. They relied on the fog as an ally, a natural screen against detection and aerial reconnaissance. As the planning for Operation Cottage continued, American commanders faced the uneasy truth: success was uncertain, and even victory would not be free of casualties. Yet the strategic imperative was undeniable. Kiska, though remote, symbolized the reach of the Pacific War. To retake it would send a message to Tokyo and reassure the nation that even the farthest corners of Alaska were under American control. By the summer of 1943, the stage was set. 35,000 troops, hundreds of ships, and dozens of aircraft were poised to strike. The fog of the Aleutians loomed like a curtain over the operation, concealing both opportunity and danger. The men who would land on Kiska were about to confront a shadow island, a place where every step forward carried the weight of history, weather, and the unknown. By mid-1943, the American High Command knew that retaking Kiska would be a formidable undertaking. The lessons of Attu, fought earlier that spring, weighed heavily on planners. On Attu, soldiers had faced entrenched Japanese positions, freezing winds, and treacherous terrain, and the cost had been staggering: nearly 550 American dead and over 1,200 wounded. Kiska promised no relief. Its cliffs rose sharply from the sea, and its beaches, often hidden by dense fog, were littered with boulders and reefs that could shred landing craft. Operation Cottage was conceived not as a small raid but as a full-scale invasion. The goal was clear: land 35,000 troops, Americans and Canadians alike, secure the island, neutralize any Japanese defenders, and establish a base for future operations in the North Pacific. Commanders from the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force met repeatedly at Adak and Kodiak, poring over reconnaissance photos and captured Japanese maps. Every detail of the operation was scrutinized, from the timing of the landing to the placement of artillery and supply depots. The composition of forces reflected both ambition and caution. The U.S. 7th Infantry Division would provide the main assault force, while Canadian units were tasked with supporting flanks and securing key high points. Engineers prepared to clear obstacles, build temporary docks, and navigate Kiska's rocky terrain. Artillery units rehearsed firing from landing craft to suppress potential Japanese positions. The Navy contributed hundreds of vessels, destroyers, cruisers, and landing craft, all coordinated to provide bombardment, troop transport, and logistical support. Air cover would come from the 13 Fighter Command, flying long sorties from Adak and Attu to scout enemy positions and protect the armada from potential Japanese aircraft. Intelligence, however, remained imperfect. Reconnaissance flights had detected Japanese installations and gun emplacements, but the dense Aleutian fog limited visibility. Reports from spies and intercepted radio messages indicated that the Japanese had reinforced Kiska after the fall of Attu, but the exact number of troops was unknown. Estimates ranged from 5,000 to 10,000. Planners erred on the side of caution, preparing for heavy resistance, even though the truth would later prove far different. The complexity of the landing itself required careful coordination. Troops would embark under the cover of night, navigating through narrow channels, avoiding reefs, and landing on beaches that might be mined or obstructed with logs and barricades. Timing was crucial. The Navy's bombardment had to suppress enemy positions without endangering the landing forces, while engineers and amphibious vehicles had to secure the shore quickly to allow reinforcements to disembark. Commanders ran countless simulations, using maps, sand tables, and even mock beach assaults to anticipate every obstacle. Weather was an ever-present threat. Aleutian summers were notorious for sudden storms, freezing winds, and thick fog. Even seasoned sailors and soldiers knew that navigation could be perilous, and supply lines could be disrupted at a moment's notice. Troops trained in heavy clothing and survival techniques, preparing for a landscape that could be as deadly as the enemy itself. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant concerns, and medical units prepared contingency plans for cold weather casualties. Despite these challenges, morale remained cautiously high. Soldiers and sailors understood the strategic significance of Kiska, and officers emphasized the honor of participating in a major operation. Letters sent home described anticipation mingled with apprehension, the excitement of engaging the enemy, tempered by the knowledge that the island was unforgiving and unknown. By late July, all preparations were complete. 35,000 men, hundreds of ships, and dozens of aircraft were poised for the assault. Every detail, from landing sequences to supply drops, had been meticulously planned. Yet even with exhaustive preparation, one reality loomed over every commander: Kiska was a place of shadows, shrouded in fog, where even the best-laid plans could meet disaster. The men of Operation Cottage were about to step into the unknown, where danger was as likely to come from the island itself as from any Japanese defenders. On a gray morning in late July 1943, the massive armada assembled at Adak and Attu, poised to strike Kiska. 35,000 men, layered in their winter gear and loaded with weapons, supplies, and rations, embarked on a journey across one of the most treacherous stretches of the North Pacific. The ocean was choppy, waves slapping the sides of landing craft and transports, while the ever-present fog rolled off the islands in thick, damp curtains. For the soldiers and sailors, the voyage was as dangerous as the battle they anticipated. The Japanese knew that the Aleutians were a strategic bulwark, and their intelligence units monitored American movements carefully. Reconnaissance planes had occasionally patrolled near Kiska, but American forces moved with a combination of radio silence and deceptive maneuvers. The Japanese had reinforced Kiska with anti-aircraft positions and observation posts, but their focus was split between Kiska and Attu, making sustained surveillance difficult. The Americans' route, often zigzagging to avoid potential submarine threats, minimized exposure but extended the journey through stormy waters. Morale aboard the ships was a mixture of tension and routine. Soldiers wrote letters, checked equipment, and rehearsed landing sequences in cramped quarters. Sailors adjusted to the continuous sway of the vessels, the sharp chill of the North Pacific wind cutting through layers of wool and canvas. Officers emphasized discipline, knowing that one mistake could lead to disaster. Fog could hide both enemy positions and deadly reefs. Navigation errors could strand a landing craft on jagged rocks. Every sailor and soldier understood that the sea itself was a silent adversary. Aircraft from the 13 Fighter Command provided intermittent cover, flying long reconnaissance sorties from Attu to Kiska. Pilots battled turbulence and freezing temperatures, scanning for Japanese ships, installations, or signs of troop movements. Though encounters with Japanese aircraft were rare, the threat remained, and every mission carried the risk of being lost to weather or enemy fire. On the ships below, radios crackled with updates, weather reports, and coordination orders, keeping the flotilla synchronized despite the vast distances between vessels. The voyage also exposed soldiers to the harsh realities of Arctic navigation. Sudden storms reduced visibility to mere feet, waves battered landing craft, and currents threatened to sweep unmoored vessels off course. Supply ships carrying ammunition, rations, and fuel had to maintain precise formations to avoid collisions. Engineers and deckhands worked tirelessly, securing cargo and maintaining engines in sub-zero spray. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats, and medical teams prepared for the inevitable cases. Despite these hardships, camaraderie held the men together. Shared hardships on the deck, improvising ways to stay dry or warm, and the mutual anticipation of landing on Kiska forged bonds. Soldiers exchanged stories of previous battles, some at Attu, others in North Africa or the Pacific, and joked to ease tension. Yet beneath the banter, there was an undercurrent of anxiety. Every man knew the stories of Attu, where Japanese defenders had fought to the death, and wondered whether Kiska would offer the same ferocity, or worse, an unknown enemy lurking in the fog. As the flotilla neared Kiska, the fog thickened, enveloping the ships in a gray silence. Radar provided guidance, but technology could only do so much against nature's unpredictability. The island itself remained invisible until the final approach, a looming presence masked by mist. Commanders reviewed landing plans repeatedly, ensuring that every troop, vehicle, and piece of artillery would hit the correct beach. By the evening of July 25, 1943, the Armada was in position, shrouded by fog and ready to strike. The tension among the troops was palpable. Hours of navigating storms, avoiding reefs, and bracing against the cold had culminated in this moment. Soon, they would confront Kiska, the enemy they expected, the island itself, and the unpredictable forces of nature. The crossing was over, the true test was about to begin. At dawn on August 15, 1943, the fog over Kiska was dense and unyielding, a gray shroud that concealed the island's secrets. From the decks of the landing craft, soldiers strained to see more than a few feet ahead. The surf pounded against the rocks, and icy waves swirled around the hulls, threatening to swamp smaller boats. Every man knew what they had trained for: the shock of enemy fire, the roar of artillery, the chaos of a contested beach. Yet as the first waves approached the shore, an unsettling quiet hung over Kiska. The 7th Infantry Division led the assault, with Canadian units securing the flanks. Landing craft nosed into the beaches, and troops disembarked with practiced precision. Helmets lopsided and rifles ready, soldiers scanned the ridges and cliffs, expecting the telltale flash of Japanese machine guns or mortars. Artillery units fired suppressive barges toward known fortifications, though no tracer fire answered them. The island seemed almost surreal, its defenses intact, but eerily silent. Engineers moved quickly to clear obstacles. Japanese forces had prepared felled logs, mines, and barricades, but the anticipated resistance never materialized. Troops advanced cautiously, sweeping trenches and bunkers. Occasionally, they found abandoned equipment, rusting rifles, empty ammunition boxes, and hastily destroyed artillery pieces. Maps of defensive positions, left behind in haste, suggested a garrison once prepared for a fight that never came. Despite the absence of Japanese defenders, the landing was far from safe. Dense fog obscured vision, and slippery rocks and hidden crevices led to numerous accidents. Soldiers slipped, fell, or struck unseen obstacles, sometimes sustaining serious injuries. The unpredictable surf claimed landing craft that grounded or capsized. Frostbite and hypothermia, always a threat in the Aleutians, affected more men than combat would. For many, the enemy was not the Japanese, they were the island and its unforgiving conditions. Friendly fire incidents added to the chaos. Confusion in the fog led to mistaken identification of units, and sporadic bursts of gunfire from nervous troops caused injuries and fatalities among their own ranks. Commanders worked tirelessly to maintain order, signaling units through whistles, flags, and shouted orders, while medical teams rushed to treat the wounded. By the end of the day, casualties numbered more from accidents and exposure than from combat, underscoring the harsh reality of the Aleutian environment. As the day progressed, troops began to comprehend the full scope of the Japanese evacuation. Reconnaissance flights revealed abandoned gun emplacements, cleared fields of fire, and destroyed supply caches. It became evident that the Japanese had slipped away in late July, evacuating under the cover of fog and submarine support. The deception had been flawless. American intelligence had overestimated the garrison's strength, and 35,000 troops had prepared to fight an enemy that no longer existed. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers who had trained for weeks, rehearsed countless drills, and braved stormy seas found themselves on an empty island. Relief mingled with frustration. Diaries from the period capture this mix of emotions: awe at the island's stark beauty, pride in surviving the harsh landing, and a lingering unease at the senselessness of the anticipated carnage. Officers, too, reflected on the operation's strangeness, noting the irony of a battle that had cost lives despite lacking an enemy. By evening, Kiska was firmly in Allied hands. Flags were raised on the highest ridges, artillery positions secured, and troops established defensive perimeters, not against an enemy, but against the island itself. The Aleutians had been won, but the cost, the injuries, the exhaustion, and the casualties caused by nature and miscalculation, was a sobering reminder that victory in war often came in forms no one expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With Kiska firmly in Allied hands, the soldiers began to explore the island's interior. What they encountered was a paradox. 35,000 men had landed expecting a fierce battle, yet the Japanese defenders had vanished, leaving behind only the remnants of their hastily abandoned positions. The fog hung low over the rocky terrain, concealing cliffs, ravines, and hidden dangers. It was as if the island itself had become the enemy, a silent and unyielding adversary. The first task was reconnaissance. Troops methodically swept the island, uncovering abandoned bunkers, artillery emplacements, and stockpiles of supplies. Japanese field maps, ration tins, and personal belongings offered evidence of the garrison's sudden departure. Engineers dismantled booby traps and cleared obstacles, while medical teams treated the inevitable injuries from falls and exposure. Mines were found scattered across beaches and trails, some still active, posing lethal hazards to the unsuspecting. The soldiers came to realize that the threat had shifted. Kiska's landscape, weather, and remaining traps were more deadly than the invisible enemy. Fog, a constant presence, compounded the challenges. Troops lost their bearings amid the swirling gray, and communication between units became difficult. Groups of soldiers would wander off course, only to be found hours later after frantic searches. The terrain was treacherous. Slick rocks, hidden crevices, and unstable cliffs claimed more casualties than bullets ever could. Even the act of moving supplies and artillery inland required careful coordination, as any misstep could lead to injury or loss of equipment. Accidents were frequent and sometimes fatal. Soldiers slipped from cliffs, fell into hidden streams, or struck their heads on jagged rocks while carrying heavy packs. In one recorded incident, a landing craft overturned while transporting reinforcements, resulting in multiple drownings. Frostbite and hypothermia continued to plague the men, despite the summer season, as icy winds and persistent drizzle penetrated clothing. Medical teams worked tirelessly, treating injuries while grappling with the sheer volume of cold weather casualties. Friendly fire remained an ongoing concern. Dense fog and unfamiliar terrain made unit identification difficult, and several incidents occurred where soldiers accidentally fired upon each other. Reports from the field describe a sense of heightened tension and fatigue, as men struggled to maintain vigilance in a landscape that was both empty and treacherous. Commanders emphasized strict discipline and coordination, yet the island's conditions continually undermined their efforts. Despite the hardships, moments of wonder punctuated the toil. Soldiers marveled at Kiska's stark natural beauty, rugged cliffs rising from the sea, waterfalls cascading into hidden coves, and the haunting cry of seabirds echoing across the fog-shrouded valleys. Letters home describe a strange serenity, an eerie contrast to the chaos and danger of the previous days. For some, the emptiness of Kiska became a mirror, reflecting the absurdity of war. Preparation for slaughter met with silence, thousands of men poised to fight an absent enemy. By the end of the first week, the island was secured, yet the cost was evident. Casualties from accidents, exposure, and friendly fire outnumbered those inflicted by combat in Attu. Troops adjusted to the monotony of occupation, conducting patrols and fortifying positions, aware that the Japanese could still strike from afar, even as the reality of an evacuated island settled in. Kiska had become a ghost island, a place where the danger was invisible, yet lethal. The soldiers' experience highlighted a brutal truth of warfare in extreme environments. Nature could rival, and sometimes surpass, any human enemy. In securing the island, the Allies had won a strategic foothold, but the victory came at a human cost that no battle plan could fully account for. The men of Kiska would carry the memory of the fog, the cliffs, and the unseen perils long after the war had ended. As the fog over Kiska gradually lifted, Allied commanders began piecing together the reality of the Japanese evacuation. The operation's meticulous planning had been based on flawed intelligence, an overestimation of Japanese troop strength and the assumption of a heavily defended island. Now, the truth emerged. Kiska had been abandoned weeks earlier, evacuated under the cover of dense fog and with the assistance of submarines and fast transport vessels. The Japanese had left almost no trace of their withdrawal, leaving behind only the remnants of defenses and hastily destroyed supplies. Reconnaissance flights and ground patrols provided the first definitive evidence. Aerial photographs revealed empty bunkers, silent artillery positions, and supply depots stripped of usable materials. Engineers noted that some fortifications had been intentionally sabotaged, indicating a planned retreat rather than a hasty flight. Ground teams reported no signs of combat, no trenches filled with bodies, no scorched earth, no resistance. Even minefields, while deadly, appeared to have been left as the primary lingering threat. The Japanese had mastered the art of deception, leveraging fog and geography to mislead the Allies entirely. The intelligence failure prompted intense review. Analysts combed through intercepted radio messages, reconnaissance reports, and captured Japanese documents. The conclusion was unavoidable. Allied estimates had been inflated, relying on assumptions rather than verified information. The Japanese 4th Air Group War Diary, later captured and translated, revealed the evacuation plan in detail. Submarines and transport vessels had ferried the garrison off Kiska over several nights, with air cover ensuring no Allied reconnaissance flights could detect the movement. By July 28, the island was entirely empty, though the Allies would not discover this until mid-August. Lessons from Kiska reverberated throughout the command structure. Overestimation of enemy strength, reliance on incomplete intelligence, and the assumption that terrain alone would impede evacuation had led to unnecessary preparation and stress on troops. Commanders acknowledged that Aleutian weather had both aided and hindered operations. The same fog that allowed the Japanese to escape also concealed the island from precise reconnaissance. Analysts stressed the importance of cross-referencing aerial, submarine, and intercepted communications data before planning major amphibious assaults. Despite the absence of combat, the operation offered valuable insights into amphibious warfare. The coordination of 35,000 troops, hundreds of landing craft, and supporting aircraft demonstrated that large-scale logistics could be managed even in extreme conditions. Officers noted how discipline, planning, and flexibility could mitigate the unpredictable elements of weather and terrain. Engineers and artillery units refined techniques for moving heavy equipment inland under adverse conditions, knowledge that would prove invaluable in later Pacific campaigns. Post-operation debriefings captured a mix of frustration and relief. Soldiers, while grateful to have avoided the anticipated firefight, were sobered by the harsh reality of Kiska. Nature itself had inflicted casualties, and human error, misidentification, navigation mistakes, and accidents remained a constant threat. Veterans reflected on the experience in interviews years later, noting that the psychological strain of expecting fierce resistance only to find silence had been disorienting. The enemy that wasn't there became a recurring theme in after-action reports, highlighting how warfare could be as much about anticipation and perception as actual combat. Kiska also provided a strategic lesson. By controlling the island, the Allies secured the Aleutian chain, preventing any future Japanese foothold in the North Pacific. While the evacuation spared the garrison from destruction, it demonstrated the Japanese capacity for cunning and mobility, even under the pressure of imminent attack. Commanders recognized that future campaigns would require both robust intelligence gathering and an understanding of how terrain and weather could be exploited by an agile enemy. In the end, the intelligence and reconnaissance efforts at Kiska underscored a fundamental truth of war: knowing the enemy and the environment is as vital as firepower. The island had been taken, but not in the way anyone had imagined. Victory was secured through preparation, persistence, and adaptability, even as the lessons of misjudgment lingered in the minds of those who had landed on the fog-shrouded shores. With Kiska secured, the immediate danger of combat receded, but the operation's toll quickly became apparent. 35,000 troops had landed expecting fierce resistance, only to face an enemy that had vanished. Yet the island itself proved lethal. Accidents, environmental hazards, and the harsh Aleutian weather contributed to casualties that rivaled those of Attu, where Japanese defenders had fought to the death. Commanders began tallying the human cost of a victory that had been, in the truest sense, unopposed. Slips, falls, and drowning claimed lives almost daily. Soldiers navigating the rocky cliffs or icy streams often fell, breaking bones or sustaining fatal injuries. Landing craft continued to struggle against strong currents, and some capsized even after the initial assault, carrying men and supplies into the frigid sea. Frostbite and hypothermia were widespread despite the summer season. Cold winds and persistent drizzle penetrated even the thickest winter gear. Medical units worked tirelessly, treating hundreds of injuries and stabilizing frostbite cases before evacuation to field hospitals. By the end of August, over 300 Allied troops had been wounded or killed, not by bullets, but by the unforgiving Aleutian environment. Friendly fire incidents added to the tally. The dense fog that shrouded Kiska made unit identification difficult. Several tragic episodes occurred when troops mistook Allied units for enemy positions. Shouts, flashes of gunfire, and panic in the mist led to confusion, resulting in multiple injuries and fatalities. Officers issued stricter coordination measures, flags, and prearranged signals, but the fog and rugged terrain made complete control impossible. Diaries from soldiers described the eerie sound of gunfire echoing through valleys, only to discover that no enemy had been present. Political and media reactions followed quickly. Washington hailed Kiska as a strategic victory, the Aleutian chain was fully in Allied hands, and the northern Pacific flank was secure. Newspapers celebrated the operation as evidence of American resolve and military efficiency, glossing over the environmental and operational hardships. Canadian media echoed similar sentiments, emphasizing the bravery of troops in harsh conditions. However, post-war analyses would reveal the irony: an enormous invasion force had fought a battle that existed largely in anticipation. Commanders reflected on the lessons learned. Major General Charles F. Thompson of the U.S. 7th Infantry Division and his Canadian counterparts recognized the importance of intelligence verification, environmental preparation, and logistical coordination. Even in the absence of an enemy, the operation tested planning, discipline, and morale under extreme conditions. Units that might have been unprepared for such hazards quickly adapted, proving that training, leadership, and flexibility were as critical to success as firepower. Troop morale, paradoxically, was a mix of pride and frustration. Soldiers expressed relief at avoiding the anticipated combat but also a lingering unease about the hazards they had faced. Letters home often reflected the strangeness of the experience. Men wrote of climbing cliffs, navigating misty valleys, and confronting dangers invisible yet very real. Veterans' reunions years later often recalled Kiska as a battle against the elements rather than the Japanese, underscoring the unique challenges of Arctic warfare. By September 1943, the island was fully under Allied control, fortified and prepared for any potential Japanese return. Supply lines were established, defensive positions strengthened, and medical and engineering teams remained on site to mitigate the risks of environment and accident. Kiska had been taken, but not without cost, an enduring reminder that war's hazards extended beyond bullets and bombs. In the end, the Aleutians campaign highlighted a unique truth of World War II: victory could be claimed without a fight, yet human lives were still at risk. The ghosts of Kiska, both imagined and real, remained in the minds of those who had weathered the fog, the cliffs, and the icy winds, forever a testament to the unforgiving theater of the North Pacific. With Kiska fully in Allied hands, the Aleutian campaign was effectively concluded. Strategically, the capture of the island removed the last Japanese foothold in the North Pacific, securing Alaska and the northern approaches to the continental United States. Though the garrison had evacuated weeks earlier, the operation demonstrated the Allies' ability to coordinate large-scale amphibious assaults under extreme conditions, a lesson that would inform subsequent campaigns across the Pacific theater. For the men who had landed on Kiska, the experience was both surreal and sobering. 35,000 soldiers and sailors had trained, sailed, and fought their way onto the island expecting fierce resistance, only to confront an empty landscape. Yet the absence of the enemy did not diminish the hazards they faced. Accidents, hypothermia, frostbite, and friendly fire incidents had claimed more lives than any Japanese gun could have. In this sense, Kiska became a study in the unexpected consequences of war, highlighting that nature itself could rival any adversary. The operation also offered a profound lesson in intelligence and reconnaissance. American commanders realized that reliance on incomplete reports, intercepted communications, and assumptions about enemy behavior could lead to overestimations, miscalculations, and unnecessary risk. The Japanese evacuation, carried out with precision and under the cover of dense fog, had outmaneuvered one of the largest invasion forces ever assembled in the Aleutians. Analysts emphasized that future campaigns would require a rigorous verification of intelligence, multiple sources of confirmation, and an understanding of how geography and weather could be exploited by an enemy. Despite the absence of combat, the psychological impact on soldiers was significant. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal a mix of relief, frustration, and reflection. Many troops described the eerie sensation of patrolling an empty island, searching for a foe that was not there. Yet there was also pride in their resilience, endurance, and ability to operate in one of the harshest environments of the Pacific. Veterans' reunions and symposiums in the years following the war highlighted Kiska as a unique chapter in military history, a battle defined not by enemy fire, but by preparation, perseverance, and the unforgiving environment. Politically, the operation bolstered confidence in Allied leadership and showcased the ability to execute complex, joint operations involving multiple branches of the military. Canadian and American forces had coordinated effectively, proving that multinational collaboration could succeed even under extreme conditions. Strategically, securing Kiska eliminated any potential Japanese base in the northern Pacific, allowing for greater flexibility in planning further offensives, including the return to the Philippines and the eventual push toward Japan. In the broader historical context, Kiska remains a testament to the multifaceted nature of warfare. Victory was not measured by enemy casualties alone, but by the ability to achieve objectives despite uncertainty and danger. The lessons learned about intelligence, logistics, environmental hazards, and inter-service coordination would resonate throughout subsequent Pacific campaigns. Commanders and soldiers alike carried these insights into battles where the enemy was present, better prepared to face both human and environmental challenges. Today, Kiska stands as both a memorial and a reminder. The island's rugged cliffs and fog-shrouded beaches preserve the memory of those who endured its trials. The ghosts of Kiska are not only those of absent Japanese soldiers, but also of the Allied men who braved storms, frost, and treacherous terrain. Their service, courage, and perseverance underscore a fundamental truth of war: victory is as much about endurance, preparation, and adaptability as it is about combat. In the end, Kiska's story is one of paradox, a battle fought against an enemy that had already gone, yet won through the discipline, courage, and determination of the men who landed on its shores. It is a reminder that in war, the greatest challenges often come not from the enemy, but from the environment, miscalculation, and the unknown. The Aleutians campaign, capped by the occupation of Kiska, left a legacy of lessons, resilience, and the indelible mark of human perseverance in one of the most unforgiving theaters of World War II.